So it has now been exactly 10 days since the Berlin Marathon. I've had plenty of time to reflect on the result, and in today's video I'm going to go over a little bit of a race recap, my main sort of takeaways from the race, and how I plan to use all this knowledge that I now have about where I'm at in terms of my fitness and more specifically my marathon fitness. Moving into Valencia Marathon. When the Berlin Marathon finished, when I got to the finish line, it's exactly 9 weeks until the Valencia Marathon. So the plan was always to do Berlin and then into Valencia as more of a main focus. That was my goal marathon, but if I'm totally honest, I was hoping Berlin would go a little bit better than how it went, but upon reflection, as I'm going to do in today's video, it maybe didn't go as badly as it could have done, but at the same time it was quite far off what I was hoping for and the expectations that I sort of set for myself. First of all, let's talk about the race itself, go through a little bit of a race recap, and then I will share my reflections on how the race went. Just for a little bit more context, around 7 weeks before the start line in Berlin, I picked up a bit of an injury. That injury was some bulging discs in my lower back, which caused me quite a lot of hip discomfort, sort of similar symptoms to sort of like piriformis syndrome, a lot of like nerve pain down my left side. In my pelvis area there was a few sort of irregularities that sort of showed up in an MRI scan, which meant I had to sort of limit the amount of impact that I was doing on the roads, which meant I took up cycling, and I also did quite a lot of elliptical stuff to sort of maintain a more of a marathon sort of training regime ready for Berlin. So I tried my best to get ready for the Berlin Marathon, but in hindsight, I was only able to average around 45 kilometers per week in the 7 weeks building up to it, but I did do plenty of cycling and elliptical work, probably around 15 hours of total training per week. So aerobically I was feeling very strong going into Berlin, and I was hopeful that the cross training that I had done would maybe result in a half decent marathon performance. Now looking back, I was a little bit naive to how my body would sort of respond to the 42 kilometers of running, but this isn't something I'd done before. I'd never tried sort of to prepare for a marathon without my usual running marathon blocks, so it was all a bit of a learning curve for me as well. So the first section of the race, I managed to find a really good pack with Callie Thackeray, who is now the second fastest British female marathon runner behind Paula Radcliffe, I believe. She ran 2:21 on the day, an incredible run from her. And also in my group was Lisa Waitman, who is the Australian record holder for the marathon. I think her personal best is 2:23, mine's 2:24, so I knew I was in a good pack, and the pack I needed to be in if I was going to give myself a chance of running a personal best. So after the sort of 5k point, I found myself in this pack. I settled in and we were ticking along nicely at around 3:20 to 3:25 per kilometer. Went through 10k in around 33:38, which was around about what I had in mind. I think before the race I would have liked it maybe to be closer to 34. It was there or thereabouts in terms of where I thought my sort of marathon pace would be on the day, based off the few little interval sessions that I'd done in the build-up and the sort of paces I'd run for marathons before. And also hoping to still come away with a tiny little PB. From the gun, I decided to go for it. It was a case of you don't get to run marathons very often. I could have gone out there and ran something a little bit more conservative, but I decided because it was Berlin Marathon, because you only get to do a couple of these sort of longer distance races a year, I would give it my best from the gun and see what would happen. I remember saying to Meg, what will be. If I fall apart, at least I'll be content that I gave myself a chance and went for it, and that's exactly what happened. I don't really have any regrets for going off at that pace, and I think even if I had started a little bit slower, my legs would have still crumbled as they did, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. So went through the halfway in 71 minutes, so around 2:22 marathon pace, which would have been a 2-minute personal best if I'd have been able to maintain that to the finish line. Spoiler, I couldn't. I knew when we got through the halfway my legs were already starting to feel heavy, which is way too early in a marathon, and I usually don't necessarily feel that sort of heavy-legged until maybe 35 kilometers into a marathon race based off the previous ones I've done. Berlin was actually my 6th marathon. I've only been doing marathons for a couple of years. I think my first was in 2022, and I've since done 3 a year since then. So I got to around the 28-kilometer point in the race, and yeah, my legs went from being like heavy to just being completely done. I've never really experienced this sort of sensation in my legs, and more specifically my quads. It felt like the muscles themselves had just broken down to the point where my legs weren't really functioning the way they usually would be. Looking back at some of the footage, I couldn't sort of flick my heels up in my usual gait cycle. I had to shorten my stride quite a lot. Because yeah, put simply, my muscles had just broken down. They hadn't done the training in the build up, and they just didn't have the resilience to keep pounding the pavement at that pace, despite it feeling aerobically fairly comfortable, or at least in the right sort of zone for sort of marathon running based on what I'd done before. So then after that sort of 28 kilometers, to be honest, it was very much a downhill spiral. I think I went from around 120th in the race to finishing in 754th, I think was my final position on the day, which is still not bad out of 55,000 runners, but in that last sort of 10 to 15 kilometers of the race, I got overtaken by around 500 runners, which was, yeah, not the best feeling. It never is in any race when you've basically cooked it. There was nothing I could do. People were running past me and were trying to encourage me to keep running. People who watched the channel, they were like, come on Ben, run with me, like tuck in. And we try and run to the finish together. But unfortunately, my quads were just completely finished. They were cramping up, and then basically just had to jog it in around sort of 4:30, 5 minutes per kilometer pace to the finish line, where I finished in 2:38 for my slowest ever marathon. My debut was 2:28, so 10 minutes slower than the first marathon I ever did, and yeah, 14 minutes off my personal best. So yeah, when I got to the finish line, I felt a sense of gratitude that I'd managed to make it to the finish line of the Berlin Marathon. I think when you finish any marathon, you should be proud of that. It's a big achievement to cover that distance. But then afterwards, in the days sort of that followed, that sort of gratitude wore away a little bit, and I was sort of left, if I'm totally honest, feeling a little bit down about the result. It's not what I wanted, and in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have raced the Berlin Marathon this year if I'd have known the sort of outcome of the race. And now looking back at my training, it was simple really. I just wasn't ready for the 42-kilometer distance. I probably could have faked a good 10k or even a half marathon, but when it comes to the full marathon distance, it was a very painful last 5 kilometers to that race, which based off my training, only covering 45 kilometers per week, is no surprise really. The longest one I did in the build up was 25 kilometers, which is on a treadmill. So there was a lot of stuff in the build up that suggested that this result would happen. Like, it wasn't a shock to me, but it still didn't feel great to cross the line in a time that's 14 minutes slower than your personal best, sorry. It was a little bit of a hard one to take. I definitely felt a little bit of the like marathon blues, and also I think because I wasn't ready for the marathon, my legs were a lot sorer, is that a word? More sore in the days post the marathon, because yeah, they just hadn't been used to the pounding of the concrete that you kind of need to do in the build up to a marathon. Aerobically during the race I felt pretty good, but in terms of my muscular endurance, my muscular resilience, whatever you want to call it, it just wasn't there on the day. My fitness was sort of up here, but my legs were just nowhere near the sort of level that my aerobic system could sort of maintain. So yeah, it was a tough one, I can't lie, and it's taken me a little bit of time to pluck up the courage to make this video, but I thought it may be worthwhile just sharing my experience in the hope of helping others, that you can maybe take something from it yourself, and yeah, basically learn that you can't fake a marathon, and don't run one if you're not ready, basically. And the only other sort of reflection to add here is that yes, I did lots of cross training which maintained my fitness aerobically, but I think what I learned is that it can't be a substitute for the training that you need to do for a marathon. Like, yes, I could go out on the bike for 3 hours, which was great. I get a really good aerobic stimulus, but it didn't replicate those sort of 2-hour long runs that you need for a marathon. There's just no impact in the cycling, which was great for me to overcome my injury, and I'm thankful that I was able to get out on the bike, and I'm still going to continue doing it in the following weeks to sort of top up my training. But I think cross training can't be a substitute for those really specific marathon sessions that you need to condition the body come race day. And finally, moving forward towards Valencia, there were a few positives. It wasn't all doom and gloom. out there in Berlin. The few positives that I took away from the race is the actual pace that I sort of maintained for the first 30 kilometers, 25-30 kilometers felt really good. It felt comfortable in terms of aerobically, and it felt like something I should be able to maintain over a marathon distance with a bit more training. I honestly felt at the 15k point in the Berlin Marathon that a PB might be on the cards today. I might get lucky. I was feeling fit, I wasn't breathing heavily, and that sort of pace that I was running at felt like marathon pace or marathon effort. Yes, the legs broke down, but I think with a bit more training in the coming weeks, the legs will catch up with the fitness, and I should be in a pretty good position if all goes well into Valencia. Another big positive for me was my core felt really strong. In the build up to Berlin, I'd been doing my core routine twice a week. I found with previous marathons that I've done that my core has often been a limiting factor. It often fatigues quicker than my legs do. And it felt really strong, which is good. It just goes to show, and it sort of confirms to me that the core routine is something I need to be really consistent with, and it's an as important part of my training as those long runs, as those interval sessions. So moving forward, the core sessions will definitely stay. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway and the thing I'm going to take forward into Valencia is aerobically at the moment, I'm really not that far away from sort of the 2:24 marathon shape that I ran when I was in Boston. All I need to do in the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks leading into Valencia is to get that mileage up and to sort of do the basics of marathon training that will get my legs ready to cover the marathon distance. Although the race itself didn't necessarily go very well for me, and at first I was pretty down about it, if I'm totally honest. Now looking forward to Valencia, I'm excited to put in the work. My body is responding well to training again. I feel like the marathon almost was as a kickstart. I got through the marathon unscathed in terms of any injury flare-ups, and my body now feels in a good position to take on more of a training load, more impact. So the next few weeks should be pretty exciting. Touch wood. I had a really good chat with my coach yesterday, and we've decided that we're on a very similar page in terms of what we think we need to work on. So the main focus is going to be on those long runs, which I'm going to be doing on Sundays. I'm going to build those long runs up to around 30, 32, maybe even 34 or 36 kilometers. We're just going to see how the weeks pan out. But all of these runs are going to be progressive, starting at easy pace and working down towards where I think about my marathon pace will be in Valencia, to sort of build up that resilience, try and put some fatigue into the legs early on in those long runs to then build that marathon pace on top of towards the end. So I'm excited about those. I know based on previous marathon blocks, that's where I really gain that specific marathon fitness. Mileage will also go up pretty quickly in the next few weeks, deciding to take a little bit more of a calculated risk when it comes to increasing my training load. Ideally, you'd want to gradually build it back, but after getting over the marathon, letting the body recover with a few weeks of easy running, we're planning to sort of build that mileage up in the coming weeks. Obviously 8 weeks or 9 weeks in total to prepare for a marathon isn't huge, so we can't really afford to have a nice gradual build, but I'm hopeful that we can get some good rewards from it. All I've got to do is really be conscious of the body, how I'm feeling, how my body's adapting, run my easy run slow, keep that intensity under control. And the final thing we're going to really focus in on is marathon pace and just building the body's conditioning at handling that sort of pace. So yeah, that basically wraps up today's video. A bit of a recap, a few of my thoughts, reflections. I'm really looking forward to Valencia. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to document the whole process of the Valencia build here on the YouTube channel. I'm not going to get greedy. I think I've just got to get back to basics, to be totally honest with you, in the next coming weeks. Big thanks to everyone who sent footage, who sent messages of congratulations after the race. It's always nice to read supportive comments, especially when you share a race vlog that you feel not necessarily proud of in terms of the result. So reading some comments that had inspired people despite me having a bit of an off day was really nice to see, and I just wanted to extend that thanks. So yeah, until the next one, aspire to run to inspire. Plenty more training, marathon training content coming up. I've got a lab test booked in for next week to really find out where I'm at in terms of my thresholds, which I'll document as well. And yeah, there's plenty of other exciting things in the pipeline. So yeah, I'll see you again soon.